too much to the detail of Catalonia and Madrid. Is the EU doomed?
Well, I think the euro is doomed for exactly the reasons that Janos gives. There are lots of countries that should never have been in the euro, but for the moment they still are in the euro. We never hear anything about Greece anymore, but I assume that Greece is still in a lamentable condition. In Italy, in Spain, in Portugal, I think things are a bit better than they were, but there's still massive youth unemployment. I would say, just referring to the Catalonian thing, a very large amount of immigration, which people in Catalonia resent, very high levels of youth unemployment, which people resent, have been factors in all of this. And I keep saying to young people in Britain who are apparently so keen to be members of the European Union, go and tour Southern Europe and see what it's done to youth unemployment.
Do you think the European Union is doomed in the way Yanis is describing it?
I don't think the vision, which was even more recently laid out by Juncker in a speech saying, you know, we're going to have this federal structure and we're going to have armies into it. I don't think that can be the future at all. And I think it's interesting that whilst we see the leaders like Merkel and Macron and others at the summits, behind in these countries, particularly in Germany and elsewhere, proportional representation has led to the rise of far-right parties who then they have to do deals with, and those far-right parties are concerned about the EU, about Brussels, about immigration. So I can't see, if it survives, I don't see it surviving in the way that some in Brussels think it should, and expand in the way they think it should in the future at all.
There have been examples of the rise of far-right parties, Austria being the most recent example. You talk about the insurgent anti-European nationalism. But if you look at the big picture, if that was really true, why did a centrist win the French elections? Mrs. Merkel's forming yet another coalition government. Mr. Rutte is Prime Minister once more in Holland. Your party's still in power in Athens. Former party, all right, same thing. Mrs. May's always talking about how she wants Britain to be the EU's closest ally after Brexit. In the broader picture, in the big countries, there isn't an insurgent anti-European nationalism.
Are you sure?
Well,
Did you check the last presidential election result? A neo-fascist party got 35% of the vote.
But that's because it was down to the final two.
It
didn't in the first round.
35% of French people. Yes. Last time they were in the final two against Chirac, they didn't manage to go even by 1% above their original
But they lost, and you know as well as I do. I follow French politics
French people
very carefully. The National Front in France is now in chaos. Marine Le Pen is a busted flush, and Mr. Macron is president and controls the parliament. He's a centrist.
Thankfully.
So there isn't an insurgent. You're exaggerating.
I'm not exaggerating at all. 35% is a very large percentage.
Sure, but then they went downhill.
Well, you haven't seen that yet. What is going downhill is the popularity of President Macron, whom I count as a personal friend, and whom I supported in the second round. But nevertheless, Macron has put all his eggs in the basket of what Caroline was alluding to, which is a federation light, a macroeconomically insignificant federation, but nevertheless that's his project. And what is he basing it on? A kind of bargain with Angela Merkel. I will Germanize French labor and the French national budget, and you give me a federation light. He's not going to get that.
Probably won't happen.
And all that he's going to do is he's expanding, as we speak, his political capital. Who's going to be the beneficiary of that? I can tell you that even though Le Pen is going down, my friend of the left, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, with whom we are at odds because he's becoming increasingly populist nationalist and anti-refugee for that matter, is picking up the populist support. So if you look at the insurgent as as a team in France,
it's always going to happen though, but it never quite.
The AfD is now
they got 30%
a major
of the vote.
force in the Bundestag, when the FDP is already in government, and the FDP is far more Eurosceptic than Michael Portillo is.
I would suggest there's no hope of the European New Deal that Yanis is talking about. Maybe there should be, but it's not going to happen.
I think they've got a huge load of things on their plate at the moment, let alone dealing with us leaving the European Union. There are all these other factors going on in terms of how they coalesce together. I mean, I've always thought it was interesting when the Eastern European countries came in, what they came in with was a desire to be part of the European Union, but also a very strong sense of self-identity, having left the orbit and the shadow of the Soviet Union. And I always thought that tension was always there. And also for us is that it's always been looked at as the British problem. in terms of the British public cynicism towards the EU, I think that's much more widespread across the European Union that some of the leaders would actually account for in terms of their politics.
I want to ask this question because I think don't people like Yanis and British Eurosceptics like you always underestimate the Euro elite's determination to keep the show on the road. You know, people have talked for years, oh, the Euro's demise, it's going to break up, others will do Brexit, North and South will split. But they were even prepared to inflict mass unemployment in your country, in Greece, to keep the show on the road.
Yes, and they'll be prepared to do that to other countries in future. I thought authoritarian incompetence, the phrase used in your film, was accurate. But may I, Yanis called me a great Eurosceptic, and I am a great Eurosceptic, but I don't dismiss for a moment the point that you also made in your film, that actually the problems that we face need to be addressed multilaterally, and that breaking up into little nationalisms is not the solution. I entirely agree with that. I am a Eurosceptic, but I didn't think our referendum was necessary. You said quite rightly that we had decided not to be in the euro. And you've heard Caroline, she's on the same page as I am. None of us wants to be in the euro. That was settled. We were not going to be part of this centralising European
So you were happy to stay in?
So we didn't need to have the referendum.
I wonder, since we've got you here tonight, Yanis, let me...
Mind you, I do not count myself as a Eurosceptic. I'm
an
enthusiastic Europeanist.
Right.
But except that the European Union deep establishment is doing all it can in order to destroy Europe.
Okay, but I want to get on to this since we have you here, because you've negotiated with Brussels and the EU. And on the Brexit talks, you think, as I understand it, that the British don't understand what they're up against in these talks?
Well, the British, one can never generalise. I don't believe there is a...
No, I mean the people doing the negotiations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We must not
Explain
conflate the government with the people.
Well, that's what I meant.
No, from the beginning, it was abundantly clear to me, especially after my experience, that Mr. Barnier does not have a mandate to negotiate. Therefore, it was a gross error of judgment by the British government to even engage with him. There should be no engagement with this people. Barnier has a list of boxes that he needs to check one after the other. You've got to give everything to the EU of what the EU demands before you begin to have a conversation about what you want. This is not a way to conduct a negotiation. So there were always two clear options. The one that I disdain, the hardest of hard Brexits. I'm not supporting that, but at least it would be, in a sense, better than what's happening now, this humiliating process. Or the alternative, which I support, which is a Norway, Britain doing a Norway for a period of 5 years, for one very strong reason, which I believe that we can see eye to eye with Brexiteers, Burkean Brexiteers, genuinely to restore sovereignty to the House of Commons, because at the moment you have not done that. At the moment, the House of Commons has not even had a chance to debate the future relations between the EU and the UK. It hasn't even had a chance to transcribe European law into British law, and only a small C conservative transition period, which involves a Norway-style agreement for a period of 5 years. And also, you know what it would do? It would cause the firing of Mr. Barnier, because a 5-year period of that sort makes him redundant.
And he might not become the next president.
Let's not go into this. But it would also detoxify the situation, because Angela Merkel would breathe a sigh of relief. The ball will be in the court of the next chancellor, and therefore Theresa May and Angela Merkel could then talk sensibly to one another.
We shall see if the British government listens to you.
Yeah.
Yanis, thank you. It's always good. Come back and see us.
Thank you very much.
Now it's late. UKIP's Henry Bolton slipping